Welcome to the Book Bungalow. I'm Tanya Mills, the owner and manager of the Book Bungalow, the only independent bookstore in southwestern Utah. And we are pleased today to have author Richard Scharine with us to talk about his new book, The Past We Step Into. This event is part of the 24th annual Utah Humanities Book Festival. This annual free festival is the Utah Humanities gift to the community, allowing us to explore all sorts of ideas by interacting with great writers like Richard. The complete program is available at www.utahhumanities.org. Our thanks to the book festival's major sponsors, George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, Salt Lake City Arts Council, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Fund, Summit County RAP, Weber County RAMP, the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, the King's English Bookshop, Weller Bookworks, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Catalyst. The Book Bungalow, we acknowledge that resides on the original territory once inhabited by the ancestral Puebloans and the Fremont indigenous people. Today, southwestern Utah is primarily home to the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe and the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah, a confederation of 5 bands: Cedar, Indian Peaks, Kanash, Kusharam, and Shivwits, tribes that have been living, working, and residing on this land from time immemorial. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land, and we honor and respect the indigenous peoples still connected to the land on which we gather. Please let's take a moment of silence to think about and pay respect to the indigenous peoples, both past and present. Through the end of October, the Book Bungalow is offering a wide variety of author events and even a writing workshop as part of the Utah Humanities Book Festival. We invite you to take a look at our schedule on our website and register now if you want to attend an event, whether it's live or virtual. I'll be posting that link in the chat room. I already have, actually. If you scroll up, I think you'll see it, along with a link to order Richard's book and another link to the book festival audience survey. We would really appreciate it if you would take a moment to complete the survey after the event for an opportunity to win a $10 gift card to the King's English. Next year, I'll try to get them to include our store on that, because we can offer gift cards too. I apologize that we got going a little late. We had a little difficulty. Richard had to use the kind services of a neighbor to get.
Incidentally, I'm not Donna Carson, in case you would like to know.
Yeah, Donna Carson for tonight is Richard Scharine.
Okay.
And finally, at the conclusion, I want Richard to do a short reading. I forgot to mention this to him. I hope he'll do a short reading from his book. In a minute. You can be thinking of that. After his reading and a brief interview with me, or brief or not, we'll see. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions from any of you, so feel free to pose them in the chat room. Richard Scharine, am I saying that right? Scharine? Okay. Was born in the back room of a Wisconsin farmhouse, went to a one-room grade school, and rode a school bus 52 miles to high school and back. He is currently a professor emeritus in the University of Utah Theater Department, where his honors include University Professor, University Diversity Award, and College of Fine Arts Excellence Award. Dr. Scharine has published 2 scholarly books, 5 book chapters, and a score or more of articles. A Fulbright senior lecturer at the University of Gdansk in Poland, he has directed 100 plays and acted in 7 foreign countries, including the title role in Oedipus at Colonus. I don't, is it Colonus or Colonus?
Colonus.
Colonus in Athens, Greece. We used to live in Greece.
Did
I'll get
you?
into that a little later.
Okay,
The smartest thing he did was to marry Marilyn Hunt Scharine.
no doubt.
Okay, so before I begin, let me just get into it right now and get it out of
Okay.
the way. Reading your book, and I haven't finished it yet, I'm more than halfway through, made me think of my own parents because my dad, he actually, well, he was in the CIA, but I didn't know that till I went off to college. But he and mom went overseas early after they married, and they had met in the theater at BYU. And
No
so
kidding.
when they were back in Washington, D.C. to begin with, they got involved with theater there. And then when they went to Athens for his first posting, they were with the Athens College Players
My goodness.
years ago. Anyway, and so it just made me think of them. So I really, this is a very hard to put down book. It's a very interesting read for all of you who haven't yet bought a copy. It really, and particularly if you're a little older, you're going to remember lots of things as you read this book. Anyway, first, I want to ask what led you to write this book in the first place?
Well, the book wasn't written all at once. I started writing fiction essentially after my wife died in 2002. And so the first stories that I have are from that period, but they're not really in the book. There's some things that came a little bit later. And actually summer a year ago, I started writing a story about our life in Lawrence, Kansas, when I was working on my doctorate. And it was a time of a lot of violence on campus and in the town, anti-Vietnam War, civil rights, and all sorts of things going on. And I'd been wanting to write about it for 50 years. I mean, literally 50 years. And so last summer, I started to do that. And it's really the longest story in the book, but it's also chronologically right in the middle of our lives, insofar as the book is concerned. And it really kind of unified everything, because otherwise I would have been jumping from 1964 to 1977. And what I needed was that period in the mid 70s, or in the early 70s, actually, to unify the book. Now, I don't know if that's why Atmosphere Press wanted to buy the book, but until then, I hadn't been able to sell the individual stories. And now it's a pretty unified piece of work.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that's the part I am just about to finish up in my reading. I see, as you're putting, I will get to your questions in a minute, but let me get through some of mine first.
You're the boss.
No, well, I mean, I'm talking to the other people.
You have the bookstore.
Yeah. So, and we talked about this briefly, but I want you to, what would you describe it as? Memoir, an anthology of fiction, or creative nonfiction? How would you describe?
Well, it's all of those things, of course, but you know, the classic phrase that all autobiography is fiction and all fiction is autobiographical. And if you went through the stories, you'd see that each one of the 12 stories has a relation to something that actually happened in my life. And for most of them, also in my wife's life as well. And, but it's still fiction. It's still fiction. There are a lot of things. I usually started with something that I knew something about and then just carried through it. You know, if you went to 1977 and you went to the story Blackout, it's when in the summer of 1977, when I was living in New York City and attending NYU. And so the blackout occurs at the same time, but there are any number of other things that are occurring at the same time. And that serves kind of as the basis of the story. And if you look at some of the events did not happen. But I take things, this is one of the things that we talked about. I once played Wallace Stegner on the stage. And Wallace Stegner's idea of writing, what he said was, you take your life apart and then you put it back together, but you put it back together in a different order. So for example, if you were looking at one of my stories, which is called Dress Rehearsal, there is a fight in it. And there's a fight, the fight occurs in December of 1961 in Fort Lewis, Washington. All right, well, there was no fight in December 1961 in Fort Lewis, Washington, but there was a fight in March of 1957 in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And the character who stands in for me both times was one, not in the fight in 1961, but he was in the fight in 1957. By 1961, he had learned not to get into fights. But I use something like that. I use something that happened to me at one time and put it in another time. We also talked about the story Gulf and how in the story Gulf, one of the things that affects the young couple who are in Austria at that particular point in time, which is where we were in August of 1964, one of the things that affects them is a letter that arrives from the army. And it's the time of the Gulf of Tonkin. And the wife is worried that her husband is going to get called back in the army, which happened once before with me too. Mm-hmm. Okay, we did get a letter like that from the army that my wife opened and couldn't read because it was army gibberish, okay? But it didn't happen at the Gulf of Tonkin period. It happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it happened 2 years earlier, but I put it in the later story because that's what the story needed at that particular point in time.
Okay. Well, thank you.
So if you take my life apart and put it back together again, you're gonna get a lot of material that is in the stories, and yet it didn't happen then, and it didn't happen there.
So did you really meet an Amish girl?
Ah, that's a good question, isn't it? Yeah. No, I didn't. But I did start out to ride my bicycle from Montreal to Wisconsin. And I did go through Upper New York State at the time. Did I get anything as exciting as that Amish girl? I'm afraid not. But I did meet some of the other people who are the basis of that particular story. Several of them, as a matter of fact.
Okay. Which was the easiest chapter to write and why?
What was the easiest chapter to write? I think maybe the first one, which was the next to the last one that I wrote. The first one was Saturday Night in Front of the IGA. And that was probably very close to being what you would call a memoir, except that there are some things in it that, again, never happened. But my parents, we only got to town once a week, especially that was true during the war. And my parents didn't see very many people then during the week. So after they had done their shopping, they would park the car, the 1937 Chevy, in front of the IGA, and they would just sit there and watch people walk by. And that was their movie of the week. Okay? It really was.
Yeah.
And of course, I was around town trying to read as many comic books as I could get away with before they kicked me out, or in later years, going up to the city library where they were happy to have me. And so that story is based upon those years. The second story that I wrote, or that is in the book, is 14 Springs. Now, 14 Springs is based upon my Norwegian great aunt who lived alone in the woods without any electricity, without any indoor running water or anything like that, but there were 14 springs. And I had a cousin who read that story and said, I didn't know any of those things about our aunt. And she didn't notice that I had changed the name and I had changed the birth dates and the birthplace for our aunt. And all of the stories that our aunt told me about growing up in that area, I wrote. She didn't tell me any of those things. So she was the basis of all of the stories. And there was at least one story in there about her feeding the raccoons and singing to them at the same time. That's true.
Oh, wow.
That's true. But that excitement, as I remember as a boy watching that, is kind of what made me come back to my aunt again and again and try to imagine what her life might have been like when she was a young girl in that area. So,
do you want to read? I forgot to have you read. Do you want to read part of some of it?
Do you have a favorite? I was thinking I would read and I was thinking very fast. I was thinking I would read the very end of the first story.
Okay.
Because in the very end of the first story, the last paragraph, if I can find it. Okay. It starts with something that is true, and I won't read that part. But I remember when my sister, who was 7 years older than I was, I remember when she graduated from high school, and my father, who never got past the 6th grade, said to her, if you want to go to college, I'll pay for it. And she didn't, but I was listening. And so eventually I did go to college. My sister didn't want to go to college, but I was listening. And I did, although I had no clue of what I was to study. My mother thought I should be a minister, like our church minister, who was living at the boarding house and going to Milton College when she and her sister were in high school. My father thought it would be more practical for me to be a large animal veterinarian. After 55 years of mostly being a college teacher, I've come to the conclusion that they both may have been right. Since those days, I've never returned to Whitewater except for the shortest of visits. Still, sometimes in my dream, I see someone walking down through the darkness of Main Street toward the more brightly lit shopping area of a Saturday night. Not a boy, an older man with a white beard. His pace is not fast, but he knows where he's going. He walks past Starin Park, and out of the darkness to his left, a wagon takes shape. A young man is sitting on it, and he is looking at a girl walking past him on the sidewalk. Ahead of the old man is a fountain, still surrounded by colored lights, but behind it, a child daycare center reforms itself into an Andrew Carnegie library. Still further down the street, the lights from a Goodwill store reveal at closer glance a drugstore door through which a shiny rack of comic books can be seen. And above what in the daytime is a yoga studio is a marquee for the Strand Theater. The film is Exodus. The old man turns a corner and walks up the street to a spot where a 37 Chevy stands in front of a grocery store. He opens the rear door and slides in behind a middle-aged couple who sit watching the people who pass in front of the windshield. The light from the street lamp passes through the open door, and a patch of it falls across the front seat. They are holding hands. Love. Who could have guessed?
Thank
That's the
you.
end of that story.
Talk
Hard for
to
me
us.
to get through with it. I almost want to cry.
Oh, yeah. Because the old man's, yeah.
I'm the old man.
Yeah, I know.
And the boy on the wagon who looks up and seeing the girl walking by is my grandfather. And he, when he first saw my grandmother, he said, "Now that's the girl I'm going to marry." And he did.
Which was the most difficult chapter to write and why?
Definitely the last one, because if it took me 50 years to get started on it, not the last chapter of the book, but the last one I wrote, which was Danton on the Caw.
Yeah.
Danton refers to Danton's death, which the character in the book is trying to put on a production in the midst of riots and shootings and killings and so on and so forth. And the Caw is the river that runs through Lawrence, Kansas. So, and I tried for years, and I finally sat down a year ago last summer and just listed about 25 scenes. I didn't use them all, and I put some others in, but once I had a storyline, then I could put all my memories in place. And that took an awful long time for me to get to.
Now, did you yourself direct Danton's death?
I did, but actually, by the time I did it, it was 1979 at the University of Utah. And I think I can say that it was a failure.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, it was a failure when Orson Welles directed it too, in 1938. He was trying to direct it in the middle of the time when he was also putting on War of the Worlds on the radio and so on and so forth.
Why did you choose that particular play?
Because that play is about an actual man. Danton was one of the early heroes of the French Revolution. But he was primarily known for having killed the members of the nobility. And at a certain point, he decided that the only way the revolution could keep going was through more killing. And he just stopped. He just stopped. And what that happened, what that meant was that he eventually was arrested and he was put on trial, and he was such an effective orator that the people who ran the court made it illegal to have the people who were defendants actually speak.
Mm.
And so he was beheaded, but the man Robespierre, who was behind his beheading, was beheaded in another 3 months, and eventually the revolution failed, and they got an emperor in its place.
So what was the point you were trying
The
to
point
make?
that I was trying to make was, we can't just keep killing ourselves out there. We need to find a way of ending all of this.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a story about somebody who was trying to do a play that shows what happened if you keep doing that. And of course, in the play, it happens right up on stage,
Yeah.
and the guy who plays Danton gets killed. So there you are.
I think there was a comment from, is Angelique related to you?
It's a very common name in my household.
Okay.
Yes, it's my daughter, who incidentally is a cognitive psychologist for the Department of Defense.
Oh, wow.
And you may want to read her story when you get to Tale of Tears, which is the next to the last story in the book.
Okay, I definitely. She put a failure that led to a successful marriage. I guess she's referring to the play was a failure, but it led to a successful marriage.
Yes, the guy who played Danton, or the character Danton, had a mistress in the play. Okay, and I cast my office mate as Danton, and I had someone who had worked with me as a TA, a technical assistant, and I cast her as the mistress. And my neighbor, who eventually died at nearly 103, she was at the play, and she said, "Are those two? Do they have something going?" And I said, "Not that I know of." And she said, "They will." And they've been married since 1979.
I see.
So
Okay.
it worked.
now,
It worked.
isn't the character Rick based on you?
Yeah, it is, but it's a name that was actually given by some friends of my wife. Now, back in 1958, my wife actually did a little stretch on the East German border. She worked at a refugee camp.
Mm.
And this couple, who I don't even know their name, we called them Papa and Mama. Okay, Papa and Mama Krakowski, during the war, had lost a girl just about the same age as my wife, and they kind of adopted her, and she kind of adopted them. And we went to visit them there, and they came to America to visit us, and so on and so forth. And Papa Krakowski called me Ricard.
Ricard.
And
Yeah.
so I liked the name. And so I just adopted it for the character, Ricard. Now, in an earlier story that never made the book, when my grandfather came to America, of course, the spelling of his name was changed. Well, in this particular one, when my grandfather came, they couldn't get the name right. And he was a big fan of the Knights of the Templar.
Oh.
And so finally he said, "My name is Templar." And so they wrote down Temple. And so I figured it'd work if you had a Ricard Temple as opposed to Richard Shrine. And I took my wife's name. My wife's name was Marilyn Hunt, and she became Lynn Chase.
Yes.
So that's what we do.
So tell us a bit more about your writing process. You said you've worked on this for 50 years.
Well, I thought about it for 50 years, and I periodically went back and did more and more research on it. But really, I already knew enough. I just didn't know how to put it together. So what I do is I usually start with something that I know, and then I may take something from someplace else in my life and put it together in there. And then I may just make up something and put them all together. I have a story that the next story I'm going to write, everything in it is true, and yet none of it happened at the same time. So
So are you one of these writers that has a bulletin board and you move
no,
things around?
I just sit down at my laptop. If my laptop is working, I just sit down there and I usually start writing, and the language kind of takes care of itself. I write very slowly, but I don't usually change much when I'm done. I do change some things, but it's really my fingers and the keyboard. My fingers and the keyboard know more than I do.
Do you have a regular regimen? Because you're retired now. You're not teaching now.
Well, actually, I am.
Oh,
I'm
you
teaching
are?
one class a week. I'm hoping to get back to this, but I have been in a play that ended Saturday night, and it's a script that I did the adaptation on. It was an English original, and I put it back together and set it in Provo. Oh, so I was in the play, and I had adapted the play, and I was also teaching. Yes, you can see what Angelique says.
Yeah.
The story is more important than the truth.
Well, that's good fiction writers, yes.
Well, I mean, it's all true. It's just not all true together.
Yeah.
Each part of it is true, but it's not true. So I've been pretty busy, and I've been also studying Polish because I would like to go back to Poland someday. That my grandfather, when he came to America, he came from what was East Prussia, but East Prussia is now Poland. And my great grandfather died in Gdansk, which was the city where I taught at the University of Gdansk back in the early 90s. So I always used to tell people, yeah, now my grandfather was born over in this particular town, but my great grandfather died here in Gdansk. I don't tell them that he was in the Prussian army at the same time. Yeah. Because that might not go over nearly as well.
Right.
But it's Poland, and I feel kind of a connection to it.
Oh, yeah.
I still have friends there.
That you're in contact with.
Yeah.
Are you, so you're not really writing every day?
No. I am, but it's, for example, I wrote an essay that I gave to all of the cast members. Oh, Danzig. She came from Danzig, which was, between the wars, Danzig was an independent city. And after the war, when Poland took over again, it came back and took its name Gdansk again. So Danzig and Gdansk are actually the same place.
I didn't know that.
Gdansk is where World War II started. That's where the Germans attacked.
Oh, that's right. They had a series on PBS not long ago that
I'm sure
showed that. I better go up here because Katie asked, you lived in Greece and played Oedipus. Would you?
Well, I didn't live in Greece. We toured Greece with our production.
Ah,
But playing for an American to play Oedipus in Greece is got to be hubris to the nth. I also had one of my best worst reviews in Greece. We had performed there, and of course, I was wearing a mask. I mean, we all kind of wore masks. And afterwards, there was like a dinner outside and so on and so forth. And somebody realized that I was part of the group and came up to me afterwards and he said, I know that you have to work with students in these plays, but someone needs to teach your Oedipus how to move like an old man. And I was 66 years old at the time. And I thought, maybe we ought to teach him how to move like a Greek hero.
she wanted to know if you would classify yourself as a classicist.
No, I don't really. I am I'm just a farm boy with a good memory. That's really what it's come down to. That's what's made everything work. I remember things. And my next story, for example.
Oh, you're working on something.
I'm working on it in my head.
Okay.
I've got all of these things that I want to cover, but it starts in 1947 when I was 9 years old and I was working on my first harvest, which is the title of the story. And I drove the grain wagon. I had a John Deere B tractor and a wagon with the grain in it. And I drove that. And we moved from farm to farm along three different roads, actually, and did all of the harvesting for all of those things. So there are a certain number of days there, and the story is going to last that number of days. And it's also going to pick up members of my family, but also the hired men. When I was a boy, a man just might walk in off the road and ask if you had any work. But we also had men who lived in the house with us and worked with us all day long, that sort of thing. My father was known as being very generous, and he paid $80 a month, but room and board also. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, some of these people almost became members of the family. Robert Frost has a thing called The Hired Man, in which he says, home is where they have to take you in when you come. And I'm thinking of a man who my uncle built a little house for outside, just a tiny little house. And the guy lived there then for the rest of his life. And there were also some other men who were just totally different and you wouldn't want to have around. I'm thinking of a hired man that another uncle of mine had who murdered his uncles. Ooh. And so, there are all these things, all these people came in and brought all of their histories with them. And they would tell you things. And if you were a 9-year-old boy and you were just sitting there and listening, you could hear them. Or maybe they would just tell you straight out. And so those are going to be part of the story. It's not going to, you may have one hired man who takes in the elements of 4 or 5 hired men, and maybe even some things that happen to other hired men, but didn't happen to anybody around me.
But will there be one main protagonist?
Um,
Or is this going to be separate stories?
well, there's going to be a balance. One, you're going to have the hired man who is there, and you're going to be able to see him and hear him talk, and you're going to be able to know what it is he did. But there's another character who you never see, and that's based upon a cousin of mine who shared a birthday with me, but was 15 years older. And he was the guy who was able to do everything. He had a motorcycle, he had a Piper Cub airplane, and he played lead guitar in a country and western band, and so on and so forth. But you never see him. You hear the motorcycle go by, you see the plane go over, and he played, incidentally, he played the music at his own wedding dance. And so you hear the music and so on and so forth, but he is beyond us.
Wow.
He's the guy who did everything, and it worked out so well. And then you have the hired man who you see there every day, and so on and so forth. But the two of them are kind of the models for the boy. What part is he going to take? I don't know.
Mhm.
I think he's going to wind up teaching theater in Utah. But
How did you get from Kansas to Utah?
well, I didn't get from Kansas to Utah, but the real answer is I was trying to go to New York. Does that make any sense? I was in Iowa teaching one of my favorite places, a Quaker college in Iowa called William Penn College.
Yeah.
Now it's William Penn University. And I taught there for 6 years, and I was perfectly happy for the first 5. And then I spent a summer in New York City. And that was when I came home from that summer in New York City. What happened was about the third time somebody said, yeah, but you wouldn't want to live there. I said, I'm not sure I want to live here. So I went looking for a job that would take me to New York City. And if I couldn't get that, I was looking for the biggest place that would hire me. And that turned out to be the University of Utah. And so I've lived here for 43 years, and it's now my home.
Wow.
So no, you never know what's going to happen.
No, you don't. You
You
may
don't.
plan out your life. You may think
Uh-huh.
you're planning out your life, but it takes
There's
you
another old saying, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him you have a plan.
Exactly. Someone wants to know if you have any life advice on how to tell our own stories.
I think you should. That's basically it. You start talking about your own story. And as my daughter said, does it have to be the truth? Well, you listen to your own story and you listen to the reaction that people have. And if they're reacting well to something, that's the direction you go.
Mhm.
That's it.
Okay.
Truth, it is truth because it came out of you, but it may not be exactly true. Don't tell my children that. Don't tell my daughter that.
So you talked about Danton's death being a failure, but
The production was a failure.
the production. But what
Mhm.
was a production you were most proud of that you felt really succeeded
Oh,
during all your years?
let's see, out of the 100?
Yeah,
None.
pick 2 or 3.
Oh my goodness. Well, I had a period for 17 years where I directed an African American theater company And that was right here in Salt Lake City, uh, which doesn't have very many African Americans.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't, but it was something that I was always interested in from the time of the 1960s. In the late 60s is when I started work on my doctorate. And the Vietnam War was going on, and there was a lot of chaos happening all over the United States. And I had this question in my mind is somebody who's going to spend their time doing plays, is that going to have any value to my country? I mean, shouldn't I be doing something that could be seen as good? And of course, what I wound up with was political theater, which I thought of as a sort of a teaching device. And Black theater was part of that. When I was teaching at William Penn in the spring of 1973, the Black Student Union came to me and said, "We want you to do A Raisin in the Sun."
Mm.
And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm doing another play." And he said, "We want you to do Raisin in the Sun." And I thought about it. And so I directed the other play in the afternoon and Raisin in the Sun at night.
Wow.
And put on both plays eventually. And that's a great play.
It is.
And the last Black play that I did was a great play. It was August Wilson's Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Yeah.
I beat the movie by about 3 years. But at any rate, there were any number in between that I've done. In the spring of 2020, actually in February of 2020, I went into the Intermountain Healthcare and I was diagnosed with cancer, okay? But the doctor who admitted me, both he and his wife were former students of mine, and he wanted to talk about this one play that we had studied in class. And I did that play back in 2002, and it was one of my favorites. It was called A Soldier's Play.
Oh, yeah.
And it got a Tony Award a Sunday night for the best revival.
Yeah.
On Broadway, and so on and so forth. So I'm looking at that one, and that was a favorite of mine. And another one that I did like in 2005 was a favorite of mine. It was called The Darker Face of the Earth. And it essentially was Oedipus Rex put on a Southern plantation in the 1840s. And where the young Black man comes back to, not knowing it, comes back to the plantation on which he was born, and he falls in love with the woman who owns the plantation, and she with him, and only at the end of the play to discover it's his mother.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a great play.
Yeah, sounds powerful. So with your experience in teaching and acting and theater, have you ever written a play or tried to?
The last play the play that finished on Saturday night, I did a major adaptation. I mean, if you have a play that is set in Northern England and you put it in Provo, Utah, you have a lot of rewriting to do.
What's the name of it?
The name of the play is Knuckle. And it is, among other things, a family tragedy, a detective story, all of those things put together. And when I was done with it, it also had a lot to say about some of the problems that we have here in Utah.
Huh.
Okay. And so that one, I did a major rewrite on. I did a major rewrite on a play that I did in 1999. It was a Spanish classic called Fuente Ovejuna. And it was based upon a true story. And Barbara Bannon, who was our local critic, the best known, she's passed on now, but she was the best known critic in Salt Lake City. She didn't like it. And there was only one part that she liked. And it turned out that was the part that I wrote. And so I thought, well, it's a bad review, but I should have just rewritten a whole lot more of it.
So maybe in the future, you'll try to come up with an entirely new play, no adaptation?
I can't see myself doing that. I've already thought of another play that I want to do. And I look at that and I think, my goodness, you're an old man. You have to decide what comes first. Should I be writing another story? I'm not going to be running in any marathons, I'll tell you that. I smashed both knees yesterday.
Oh.
And I'm hoping that they'll be back up enough so that I can stand up in class later on.
Yeah. You may be familiar with someone in my writers group, Deborah Threedy.
Deborah Threedy wrote the play Wallace about Wallace Stegner.
Yes.
I played Wallace Stegner.
Yeah,
you knew that?
She's it didn't, the Wallace Stegner part didn't, but I thought he's got to know Deborah Threedy.
Sure.
She's in my writing group.
And she's a terrific actress too.
Yeah.
I was in a play with her. What was it? It was about the women back in the time of multiple marriages.
Polygamy? Oh, is it about Juanita Brooks? She was working she's working on something else. Okay.
Okay, no, this was 1997, I think.
Okay.
1997. And I played, well, at any rate, she played one of the women, because they would put the women, it was one of those things that were trying to separate out to see who was the first wife. And the first wife, then, she was okay, but all of the other wives, they were used as a way of getting to the men. Okay, this was set in 1887. So.
Well, this has been terrific. Are there any other questions from our audience? I saw
the name of the director. Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah. So I want to thank you.
My pleasure, and I hope I can get back, and I hope I can get into my laptop now.
Oh, yeah. So I will be sending an email out following this once I've downloaded the recording of this to our YouTube channel so that you can, and I'll share it. I'll definitely share it with Deborah. I'm sure she's going to want to watch it.
I had a friend of mine call me in the middle of the day from Bandon, Oregon, and he had to be, actually he was taking part in a march in the afternoon, so he was going to miss it, and he was hoping he would be able to get a copy of it.
Well, good. I will include you on the email for this,
and I will just forward it.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
My pleasure, Tanya. Thank you very much for asking me.
Yeah, and please, those of you who can take the audience survey, the link is up there in the chat room. I will include it again in the follow-up email in case you can't see it. Have a good day, everyone. Stay safe and well.
Thank you.